Today, more than ever, migration has become part and parcel of our daily life. But the sad reality is that many migrants continue to suffer from exploitation and discrimination. For the first time in 2015, African leaders adopted a bold new initiative to ensure effective migration and mobility in Africa. The initiative, developed by the African Union Commission, the ILO, the IOM, and the UNECA, aims at prioritizing migration as a transformative force for Africa's development. But what are the key objectives of the Joint Labour Migration Programme?
The Joint Labour Migration Programme, which we fondly call the JLMP program, is within the context of very interesting developments in Africa and beyond Africa. The data available from UNDESA, which is the most credible available data on movements of people, shows that about 30 million Africans moved in 2013. They moved out of their countries of origin. Out of this 30 million, half of them stayed in Africa. Because normally when we hear about migration in Africa, we think Africans are leaving Africa to Europe and to America. But we found that half of them stayed in Africa when you look at Africa, Cape to Cairo. But when we look at sub-Saharan Africa, 65% of sub-Saharan Africans stayed in sub-Saharan Africa. If we now break this down by the different regional economic communities, about 80% of West Africans stayed in West Africa. So that gives us an understanding of migration. Then migration also, the picture also showed that people from other continents moved into Africa. So plus minus 1 million Europeans moved into Africa. And more than 1 million Asians moved to Africa. So when you look at labor migration, there's the movement from Africa to other regions, other continents. There's the movement of other continents into Africa, but there's a lot of movement of Africans within Africa.
If you look at the general trend the African Union is driving at the moment is for Africa to try as much as possible to find ways of solving Africans' problems, possibly using Africans to do that. And one of the ways we emphasize in trying to do that is to make sure that we improve funding from African sources for most of these problems. The idea is we're bringing all these programs together to get people more interested, member states more interested to buy into these programs. So we improve this funding locally, and then we can expect the kind of help we need from our partners, ILO, IOM, and the others, to be more meaningful. Because you can do better if you start something yourself and you ask people to come to help.
The international partners are very critical. I mentioned during the presentation that just within the last 2 weeks we have seen 3,800 African migrants being assisted or rescued at Lampedusa. What are they going for? They're going for their jobs. Can we change the minds of the Europeans to create more jobs here? And these are cardinal things that we would like to make sure that we focus on.
Employment, and particularly youth employment, youth unemployment, if you like, have become very critical for most governments. And yet we know that skills exist in parts of the continent which are in need on other parts of the continent, but they are not always able to move to where those areas are. So the whole issue of mobility, and it's not that we are inventing it. If you look at population dynamics, you know that there is a lot of mobility around Africa. And yet often there are so many difficulties with people moving, and it is ironic, you know, that we celebrate the remittances that people are able to send, and yet physically there are so many barriers. So for us it is imperative, we have to be rational, we have to also make use of the skills that exist. Also, the protection of your rights, you know, as an African, should be taken for granted around Africa.
So we very much support this initiative. As you know, the EU-Africa Summit last year included a joint declaration on migration, which emphasized quite rightly not only the challenges of illegal migration and human trafficking that we all must face together, but the important opportunities. And this, the presentation today and this discussion today is an important reminder of just how big those opportunities are. And we've agreed in our joint roadmap for the next 3 years that human development should be one of the key pillars, and within that pillar, migration and mobility.
There are factors that increase the vulnerability of Mexican migrants in US. There is a lack of education, there is a lack of legal status, and that's why Mexico has established an institute. It's named Institute of Mexicans Abroad. The Mexican government will have strategic partners who will receive the support of the institute through different programmatic actions, protection and documentation services. In this sense, Mexico is keen to engage with the GLMP in knowledge transfer and assist in labor market.
And the beautiful thing about this program is that the GLMP program, as developed now, is for 4 years. But it's not the entire lifespan. It's 4 years within 10 years. So we expect the program will be a 10-year program. And at the end of the 10 years, all those challenges that were identified by the regional economic communities in business and the trade unions that engaged in December 2013, that by the end of the 10 years, we would have addressed them significantly, if not all. In terms of the medium term, that's the 4-year program. What is expected that at the end of 4 years, we will have had 2 comprehensive and strategic reports telling us what is the state of labor migration based on data in Africa. The first report is coming out this year. The next report will come out in 2017.
Where there is economic growth, there's not been enough job opportunities created for the large numbers of school leavers that enter the labor market every year. So for that reason, a lot of them tend to try and look for opportunities outside their countries as well. And there's nothing wrong with that per se. I think what we're trying to do is to make sure that we do have standards, that there are norms that are observed, and that the rights of migrants are observed wherever they work, and that they're allowed to contribute, and they're allowed to live not in fear, and they're not exploited, and they're given opportunities in some cases to contribute to the development of the countries where they are.
And the way forward here is not the 50 years, we're talking about the 10 years, the first 10-year evaluation program of Agenda 2063. We want to bring all these issues together, in particularly where the impact on women, and the youth, we round them up and get a very successful first 10 years of Agenda 2063. And that's the way forward.